What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Fitness for Life podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Lohr, and today I'm going to be talking about training splits, what they are, why we do them, and kind of how I like to use them when it comes to my own training and that of my clients. So we'll dive right in. If you don't know what a training split is essentially how we split up, the exercise selection that we choose for, different days of the week. For example, I might have an upper body day, a lower body day, core day. Some people will do like a push day, a pull day, and a legs day. Other times people will associate splits with more like, hey, I'm going to do these particular body parts. For example, a common one is like back and biceps on the same day or chest and triceps on the same day. Those are often going to be very similar to like a push and a pull day, where your pull day is going to be more your back and biceps, your push day is going to be more your chest and triceps. Do things a little bit differently. It all kind of depends on what you want to focus on, right? So if you're focusing on performance, say you're an athlete or maybe you have a competitive goal that is not specifically related to, body composition, for example, like a bodybuilder or a powerlifting endeavor or a strongman, if you fall outside of those like weightlifting and physique sports, then you're going to want a split that focuses on performance. And what I've found is, focusing on performance, you're more going to want your basic movements in just about every workout. And you can break that up by body part a little bit. But for example, you might have a day, depending on how often you train, you might have a day that is focused on every single, movement where you have a push, an upper body push and an upper body pull, deadlift pattern or a hinge pattern, a squat pattern, a lunge pattern, potentially a jump, depending on what you want to go into in terms of how athletic is it. Is jumping required? You might also have do we need power development on the upper body? So am I including some sort of med ball work or throw? And then am I doing some sort of sprint, right? Something at speed, right? So that's an example of if I was doing that, training 3 times a week and then doing my sport, I would have all of those things involved. The push, the pull, the squat, the hinge, the lunge, the carry or walk, or even sprint variation, and then some form of upper body power, probably also a core exercise in there as well, or two. You never know. And so that's how I'd go about a performance-based split. Now, if you're somebody who's going to be training for performance with more frequency, then you can break it up a little bit differently. There's no exact right answer to this. What I always like to keep in mind is we always, when we're thinking of our training splits, we want to optimize for our best recovery. Usually what this means is I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing, by the next time I go to do that, I'm going to be fresh and going to be able to give, the best effort and intensity that I can, while also recognizing that the stimulus has to be enough for an adaptation to take place. Where some people can go wrong is, for example, if you have a 6-day-a-week training program, odds are you are not going to be able to, like, you're only going to be able to fit, maybe a couple exercises per, maybe 2 per body part at most into each day. And so what that's going to look like is you might not have enough sets and enough intensity, enough stimulus over time if you stick with a full body approach every day. Now, if I have that same approach and I say, okay, instead with a longer approach, if I'm training 6 days a week, now I can probably split it up where maybe one day is, you know, more my upper body day where I'm getting a horizontal push pull, I'm getting a vertical push and pull, I'm getting a chest focused exercise, I'm getting a back focused exercise. I'm targeting, lots of different things with those, on that day. Then I have, 3 or 4 days to recover on my upper body before I really target those again. That allows for a lot of rest in between, allows my body to take on that repair process to rebuild the muscles that I want. And then the next day, rather than focusing on upper body, it would be a lower body focused day. And you can kind of rinse and repeat that way. So hopefully that gives you an idea of like, all right, for example, someone who's training 3 days a week, you're probably not going to have enough time, you're only going to be hitting something once per week. If you split it up where it's once per week, if you do a upper body and like a core day, meaning each of those is its own day and you're only training 3 times a week, if you miss something, now it's 2 weeks before you are able to hit that again. Whereas a rotation where you have a full body approach into it, it's not a big deal if you miss something because you're going to target it, within a day or two anyways. So that allows, I think, for a more flexible and realistic approach to training outside of people who are, more experienced, more focused, more intense with their training protocols. And that's why I say like that's where I want to lean for most people is like a 3 or 4 day split, where if we're doing a 4 day, maybe we do like upper and some core and some, a functional exercise or two. And then like the next day would be lower and some core, functional exercise or two. And then probably, again, you can split this up however you want, depends on your goals. I'll give you an example. I have a client who's just starting out with me who is somebody who, ab development is something that we're focusing on. And so in order to do that, we want to make sure that there's enough volume, enough of his training is focused on abs. And so the way that we're splitting things up is that he has, one day a week where he is, or excuse me, 2 days a week are purely focused on abs. The other days are, you know, kind of an upper body split, upper lower body split. And what that does is it allows him to get enough volume and intensity on training his abs, though on those 2 days, then plenty of time to recover, 2 to 3 days in between to recover for his next day where he's going to be doing training abs again. And again, that recovery is where he's going to be making those strides. So it's not, that's a good example of getting more specific with, hey, this is a body part that I want to improve in terms of its growth, its physique. It's the same approach. If you don't have enough volume, if you don't have enough sets, take into the appropriate intensity, you're probably not going to grow in the ways that you want to grow there. It's a really common example that I can give, is with my female clients, especially if there's often a desire to look a little bit curvier, kind of from an aesthetic standpoint. That's a goal for many of them. In order to do so, oftentimes you want bigger butt, bigger hips, you want muscle growth at those areas. And the same is true of like, you actually want a little bit of muscle growth at the chest and the shoulders and the upper back to kind of isolate and target and give that appearance that you're after. But if you're not, and this is a note on fueling appropriately, during those recovery periods and training appropriately, you know, not only do we have to train appropriately and give that time for recovery, but also we have to make sure that we're fueling appropriately. If you want muscle growth, you're going to want, higher protein intake. You're probably going to want a higher carb intake to fuel your your energy during those training sessions. You're probably also going to want to make sure that sleep is an important part of that process. So when I'm talking with somebody about training splits, one of the things that we often talk about is there's a minimum, a minimalist approach, and there's a maximalist approach. And a concept that a lot of people will want to shoot for is what we call your max recoverable volume. So as really push yourself, when you're in a period where you can really push yourself in your training split, you want to approach what we call this max recoverable volume, which is essentially what is the maximum amount of work I can do in the gym training heavy that my body will be able to fully recover and be prepared, be fresh for that same level of intensity the next time I am training those same attributes, those same muscles, that same area, that same movement. And that is something that I think a lot of people ignore, or there's this mentality that if I just work harder, I'm going to get the results I want. And sometimes it's about working smart and not necessarily harder. And so max recoverable volume changes for different people, and it changes depending on what your period of life may be, what stage of life you may be. I can't give the same training split to a single mom who's got 2 or 3 kids, and they're young and she's having to wake, maybe they're still feeding and she's having to wake up with them in the middle of the night, and I can't give that same training split to a 20-year-old kid who is, you know, doesn't have like a family, doesn't have a whole lot of obligations. Like, that person can, recover a whole lot better than the single mom, the single parent. Um, Same thing with like somebody in their 70s. Our recovery definitely slows down as we age. And so I can't do that same approach with that person because they're not going to be able to recover the same. So we have to find a volume of training, an amount of training, an amount of work we do in the gym that allows us to be fresh for the next time. Something that I think is important to know for this is essentially that we can build on our capacity for what our max recoverable volume is. This is one of the attributes we can train, and we can actually train it through a couple of ways. One is exactly what you think it is. It is the more frequently I do this volume, a certain volume of training, the more I'm able to elevate that volume of training that I'm able to recover maximally from. And so, that's one component of it. Another component that people may, and I think do, undervalue is training the different energy systems within that our cardiovascular system uses. There's energy systems within the body. One of the things that's involved in training those appropriately is the intervals I'm using, the intensities I'm using when it comes to my cardio, and the frequency. And as it's the same sort of approach. As I build my cardiovascular base, that actually allows me to recover quicker. It's our cardiovascular system and that same training system that allows us to, rest, repair things well, and deliver oxygen to the right places, deliver nutrients to the right places within our body, within our muscles. And that is one of the things that is going to be a difference maker for people who are looking to improve their ability to recover, allowing them to train more. It is something that is highly underrated, but I can show this to my clients time and time again. Hey, if we, if we increase cardiovascular output and the ability for you to, train at a high level, improve your cardiovascular output, then we almost always see, recovery goes up. You're feeling fresher for your workouts, for your training sessions. ultimately you're able to train at a higher volume and still recover well, possibly even better than you did before. So now you're fresher for every workout, which obviously is going to improve training output. I know I kind of shifted into talking about, training output, talking about, recovery more so than the exact training splits. I'll use an example. I kind of used the one client example of, hey, we have a 4-day training split with, 2 days that are kind of self-led, and then 2 days that are focused on core, another 2 days that are um, focused on a combination of upper and lower. A really common one for me is that 3-day a week full body program where we're getting in, these basic movements and movement qualities is a way that you can split things up. Another thing is just taking a look at, hey, what are the main body parts I want to train? Break them up, into, hey, how many days do I want to train? How many body parts do main body parts that I have? And you can basically just say, hey, look at the main muscles here. I have my shoulders, my biceps, triceps, my forearms. I've got my chest, and that pretty much covers your chest and back, pretty much covers your upper body. Core you can kind of lump in however you need to, or you can take it and say, hey, I'm going to take core and I'm going to break it into what are the different ways that my core moves my body, which is, you have your flexion extension, your toe touch type things, your crunch type things. You have your side bend, so bending side to side, and then you have your twisting, right? So your Russian twists, other, pal off press, that sort of thing. And you can break those up that way. Now you have a good approach to, okay, what are my body parts? What are the ways that my body moves? Now let me look at how many of those I have that I want to train specifically. Which ones do I want to prioritize? And then build from there. And you can kind of split them up into, how many days do I want to train? That then will give you a good idea of where you need to, if you want to do a custom training split, where you need to focus your attention. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. I hope that gave you guys a little bit more just insight into training splits, into why we split things up. That was the main thing I wanted you guys to hear was, why do we split things up? It's for optimizing recovery and optimizing intensity of each training session. If we can do both of those things, a lot of good things are going to happen. A lot of good things are going to follow. You're going to get good results. So thank you guys for tuning in and listening, and we will see you guys next time. Take care.